Welcome to the first episode of Sanctified and Stilettos. We're saved and sexy intersect, and where we delve into faith, feminine, and fearless conversations. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. Heather E. Burton. I'm a scholar, a writer, a minister, an author, all of the above. But here on Sanctified and Stilettos, we believe that you don't have to shrink your spirit or your sparkle. You see, this is a space for women who love God, women who love themselves, and women who aren't afraid to step boldly into purpose, women who aren't afraid to step into prayer and glide in their heels and do everything that they need to do. And so on this show, we will have some breakthrough. We will talk about beauty. We will talk about our battles, from relationships and confidence to callings and our character. On Sanctified and Stilettos, we are talking about it all. And so what we're going to do often is we'll fix our crown. We might adjust our crown, but we're going to put on our stilettos or your sneakers, whatever you choose, and we're going to walk this thing out together. This show is about these two words. So we have sanctified and we have stilettos. And the idea of sanctified is to be set apart for holy consecration. And so when we think about people within the church, specifically women, we're dealing in this aspect of Black women and being set apart. And set apart for God's purpose in their life, God's mission in their life, what they've been called to do, how they've been called to operate. And so, and then the second word is stilettos. And so stilettos is really about this idea of our shoes. And so when we think about our shoes define who we are. Sometimes our shoes say a lot about us, and sometimes our shoes say absolutely nothing about us. Sometimes our shoes tell the mood that we're in. Sometimes they just say, hey, these were the shoes closest to the front door, and these are the shoes that I put on. But the reason that I chose the word sanctified and stiletto was twofold. It's sanctified is the idea of being set apart, as I said, but stilettos is this reclaiming. And so if we think about it, historically, sometimes stilettos have gotten a bad rap. As if people put stilettos in this category, you know, being like a little loose, especially from the church, a little loose, because everybody was supposed to wear their little, you know, they little shoes. It was closed toe and little pumps and little heels, their kitten heels. And so when the stiletto came out, that 4 or 5 inch heels, people started kind of cocking their head to the side, specifically in the church. And so it's this idea of reclaiming. I can remember that when I was graduating with my PhD, I was the youngest person to graduate within my class with my PhD. And so what was interesting is that I'm sitting in the front row because, you know, when you get your PhD, you get to sit in the front row at graduation. So I'm sitting in the front row at graduation, and all of a sudden I get a text message. And on that text message, my aunt asked me, she was like, why do you have on those hooker heels? And I looked and I was like, really? She calling my shoes hooker heels? But then I looked down and I realized everybody on the row, I'm like looking down the row, and everybody on the row had closed toe black pumps on. Except for me, I had on some bad strappy sandals. Let me tell you, I was real cute. I can remember exactly what I had on. I had some strappy sandals on that wrapped around my calves, and then I had on this short suit under my robe, my graduation gown. But it really made it stand out to me how shoes can often define who you are, but what people think about you and the thoughts that people have. I can remember growing up in the church, and some of you all can relate, is that a woman never sat with her legs out. You were supposed to tuck your legs or tuck your feet behind you and cross at the ankle. And so nobody crossed their legs at the knee. And so these are things that we've been raised and we've been taught in the church. And so how do we counter some of those things to still allow us to be women, but to be modest women, to be saved and to be sexy? Is there anything wrong with having sexiness as long as you're not harming anybody else? As long as you're not using it as a weapon of warfare. We'll use that language. As long as you're not using your sexiness as a weapon of warfare, but you're using your sexiness for your own self-benefit, for your own appeal. And so on this show, we talk about that. We talk about the things that we often don't talk about in the church, the things that we shy away from. We talk about we're going to talk about, because as this is episode 1, we're going to talk about different things that affect us as Black women, different things that affect us as women. And so when we think about sanctified and stilettos, those two words also have an intersection. And that's what it is about women. Think about this. Black women have an intersection. Kimberly Crenshaw introduced 1986, I believe, 1986, this whole concept of intersectionality. And intersectionality was this idea of race and gender and how they intersect as social identities. And what she was looking at was this idea of women, specifically Black women in the criminal justice system, and how they were being treated. And so Crenshaw began studying this intersection of race and gender. And so often people don't think about what it means for Black women in particular to have this cross of race and gender. And, and in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and race, racial relations, and those type of things with concepts, is that when you take gender and race are what identifies as two marginalized identities, meaning they're considered identities that are often oppressed, identities that fall below the norm, or they're not the norm. And norm is shaped in that idea of what whiteness has shaped in terms of what's normalized or what is expected. And so if you have these two identities that are actually oppressed identities, how do you navigate in systems that are normalized? And so on this show, we take the identity of race and gender and we talk about how does this now intersect with our religion? How does this now intersect with our spirituality? How does this now intersect in terms of our Christian faith, our beliefs? Because in this same particular work is Christianity in particular is considered a dominant identity. It's considered normalized. It's considered norm across the board. And so if we're looking at this, we've got one normal identity and two marginalized. And I take myself for an example. And this is not to put my social identities on anyone else, but it's just to share what my social identities are. And so I identify as a Christian Black woman. And everything that I do is shaped in those three identities. And what I typically say is that when I talk about Christianity, it's Christianity not shaped in white supremacy, but Christianity that's viewed through a lens as a follower of Jesus Christ. And what does that mean? That means that we strip away the patriarchal systems. We strip away the racist systems. We strip away the gender systems that have minimized what women can do, and in particular, Black women. And so when we strip all of those things, then we start viewing things from a different lens. And so on this show, we're going to talk about the empowerment of Black women who, here we go, y'all. Black women have always been powered. And I'm going to use that word, and it probably is not grammatically correct, but this is my show, and I can say what I want to say. I can have a whole bunch of Dr. Burtonisms. And this season, you're probably going to hear a whole bunch of Dr. Burtonisms that I'm going to say what I want to say, how I want to say. I'm going to use, in the world, theoretical world, I'm going to use some Ebonics. I'm probably not going to use much of the King's English because y'all my people. And as my people, you're going to love me for who I am, because who I am is about this show. And so when we talk about, the Sanctified and Stilettos, we're talking about that intersection of these identities and how do these identities play out in our everyday lives, things that we often don't even think about. Here's a great example. On one of our shows, we're going to be talking about Black women in wealth. And what does it look like for Black women in wealth and how it's been classified within the church, or how it's been defined, or how we've been raised to believe a certain thing about money, how we've been raised to think a certain way about money. What's our relationship with money? For example, how were we raised? Is sometimes we were raised in an environment where money was scarce. And so when we get older, we become so frugal that we don't enjoy life. Or we were so raised in a place that was so scarce that when we become older, we spend and don't think about the future. And so when we're thinking about this, we're going to think about and talk about, what is it? What did the church teach us? What did the church get right? What did the church get wrong? And then when I talk about the church, I'm talking about organized religion and not the body of Christ. Because when we define the church biblically, we know that the church is the body of Christ. But what does organized religion, what has that taught us? And here, let me say this, y'all. Because the one thing I don't want anybody thinking is that I am against organized religion. I believe in organized religion. I believe biblically it's necessary. And I believe that we need organized religion. I had one of our guests to talk about structure. We need that. So that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is how there has been a misconception, a misunderstanding, a misteaching very often when it comes to organized religion. We're also going to talk about marriage and ministry. What does it look like to be married and to be in ministry together, or not to be in ministry together? What does it look like when we talk about media images? You know, sometimes we don't think about the images that are portrayed in the media of us. And I'll give you a couple examples. Here we go. The angry black woman. Many people don't talk about the angry black woman being a trope that was introduced from a negative standpoint. Or when we talk about other things, when we talk about the Jezebel. I was laughing with somebody the other day when you talk about Jezebel. Have you ever heard anybody name their child Jezebel? We ain't never heard of a child named Jezebel, because everyone knows that biblically Jezebel received a negative connotation. Now, I'm not telling y'all to go out there and name y'all kids Jezebel either, but I'm talking about the things that we're taught and how it shapes us. How about, here's another one that we don't talk about in the church: sex. Oh, not sex. You know, we got to shy away from sex. We can't talk about sex. But the reality is, sex is real. God made relationships to be beautiful and to be real. But we've taken these things and we've destroyed it. We've tainted it. We've turned it into something negative. And we're going to talk about how there are many women who were raised in the church, and they were taught that sex is wrong, but they were taught that sex is wrong from a perspective of beating fear into them and being afraid to actually engage in sex once they're married. And so if we're looking at it from a biblical standpoint, we're looking at it from the lens of sex and marriage. But if you get into a marriage and you're so afraid of sex, how do you have a good, intimate sex life? We're not just talking about intimacy, but I'm being real with y'all. How do you have a good sex life and you're afraid of sex? And so these are things that we have to think about, we have to focus on when we're talking about a Sanctified and Stilettos. We're going to talk about how people turn radical, or how people are resilient. And so this idea of radical resilience, turning passion or turning pain into passion. And so taking the traumas, taking the setbacks, taking the things that we experience, and how do we turn that into something that's passionate? Here's another subject, y'all, I cannot wait to dig into this season. In this season, one of the subjects is liberation theology, and talking about theology from the perspective of social justice, liberation, how Jesus came to set the captives free. And so we're going to talk about that. And I'm just so excited of the guests that have agreed to join us on Sanctified and Stilettos. Our guests range from those who are newscasters, broadcasters, to athletes, to professional women, to pastors, to ministers. Y'all, we going to even have some men on the show. We're going to have some men on the show, and they're going to share their perspective when it comes to women and discussing issues about women. And you know, I know we get real shy sometimes. I used to joke. I've done several workshops. And one of the things that I say within these workshops is, or when I'm planning the workshop with people, is when they try to bring men and women together. I don't know what it is about getting men and women together in a space specifically within the confines of the church, but women shut down. They don't want to have real conversations with men. And I'm not saying all women, but my experience in presenting has been that for some reason, women shut down in the space. And so we're going to have conversations where the men are going to give their perspective about us. Like, from a man's perspective, this about a woman. For example, from a man's perspective, what is sexy? From a man's perspective, what does stilettos do for them? Now, you know, sometimes that might go a little left, y'all, but we're going to try to keep it. We're going to try to keep it real saved on this show most of the time. And so I'm just excited about what we are going to engage in this show and the things that we're going to, the conversations that we're going to have. It says it in the title. We're going to have fearless conversations. Some stuff people don't want to talk about, but our hope is that we will be transparent and we will be real, and you'll get to see our personalities. You'll get to hear our stories of my guests as well as myself. One of the segments that I'm really excited about too is audience questions. So we're going to take audience questions, and I will do several shows where it would just be me and audience questions and answering those questions. that you all send in, that you write, that you email me, that you text me. You can always reach me on social media and other platforms, which will be listed on this show and in other places. But we want you to engage. We want you to be a part of the discussion. So this is not just about me interviewing people, but it's about subject matter. And how do we tackle in-depth subject matter that we shy away from in the church? It's interesting because when you think about our shoes, or when you think about stilettos and the things that we wear and what we do, we often talk about what we do versus who we are. And so we're going to really kind of dig into who are we? Who are we versus what we do? And who are we and what shapes us? And a lot of that for many of my guests is faith. Is that faith has shaped their journey. And so they'll share their stories from the perspective of our subject matter. Even things that people may not want to talk. How about this one? We're going to talk about high profile dating. And what does it mean to be a celebrity status and date? What does it mean to date as a pastor? How do you date as a pastor? Do you date the people in the congregation? Or do you stay away from the people in the congregation? And that's an interesting subject, because not everybody is married that does ministry. Would it be everybody's desire? I have no idea. But on that show, we'll find out. Is it people's desire to be married? And so thinking about that, you'll also probably hear from me on some of the books that I've written. I'm Single, So What? Many people know me from that book, the I'm Single, So What, which came about because people kept saying, why are you single? I don't understand why you single. And it was one of those things for me as an author. I'm single because I am. There's no reason behind it. There is no justification, but I'm single. And then I'd be like, well, you gonna find me a date? Like, why you keep asking me this? So little things like that we're going to talk about and we're going to discuss. And we are just so excited for this is episode 1, but we've got many episodes to come throughout this season. Next episode, our episode 2, is dealing in radical resilience. And so we're going to talk to Dr. Tyrese McAllister. And on that particular episode, we're going to talk about how pain was turned into passion, a very moving story that shares the experience of losing a child and what that did for faith, but also what it's done to develop and grow other opportunities for Dr. McAllister. So excited about that. But the segment that I'm so excited about is the stilettos and why you have on stilettos. And let me say this, I am not requiring my guests to wear stilettos. So if you want to come on the show, don't be afraid. You don't have to wear stilettos if you don't wear them. I don't even have on stilettos today. I have on chunky heels today. But the purpose of that is to show the multifaceted of women and how women have different issues, but they all have similarities. And so it's just showing the different things as women. It reminds me, and I've said this at other times, but it reminds me of the book, Men Are Like Waffles, Women Are Like Spaghetti. And so it's this idea that women are like the noodles of spaghetti. The noodles interchange, overlap, intersect, and all of that. Whereas men are like waffles. Yeah, they're like waffles. And it's no offense to men, but this is what the book says. Bill and Jill Farrell, I think that's who wrote the book. But men are like waffles. In other words, men think in blocks. And so work is a block, family is a block, church is a block, life is a block, and at the center is sex. And so everything leads to sex. But in those blocks, if church is not right, then I can't concentrate on work. If work's not right, then I can't concentrate on family. But as women, women are great, y'all. We are great. But as women, it's like spaghetti. So everything overlaps. And so we can be on the phone handling business, bouncing the baby on our knee, getting ready to run and go grocery shopping all at the same time. And so this is that. And so that's what we're looking at. is the multifacetedness of women, the multi-identities. And let me be careful in saying multi-identities, because I know men who are watching this will be trying to make us have like 5 different personalities or something like that, versus identities in terms of the things that we do. So we're going to stay away from y'all trying to put labels on us, men, because I know what happens. I've been in too many rooms where I've had conversations with men and it turned into this whole other thing. So those are some of the things that we are going to talk about on Sanctified and Stilettos. And so I am excited, and I hope y'all are excited too. And tell all your friends to listen in. Do some listening parties, y'all. Do some listening parties. That's what I'm going to ask. Do some listening parties. Just get together, do some listening parties, and then talk about the episode afterwards. Or how about this? Even for some of our episodes, think about how you're going to change to be better than you were when you started watching the episode. And so thinking about those things as you watch Sanctified and Stilettos. I'm excited for this show. I'm also excited because this is a new network. And so I am airing on a new network, the Strategic Moves Network, as part of, Sanctified and Stilettos is part of the Strategic Moves Network. And so we have other podcasts that will be a part of this network. And so think about this, y'all. This is a Black-owned network in Cleveland, Ohio, and we are doing great things and having great opportunities for others to grow and to develop and to use their talents and gifts. Thank you for joining us on episode 1 of Sanctified and Stilettos, where saved and sexy intersect and where we delve into faith, femininity, and fearless conversations. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Dr. HEB, that's DRHEB, or stay up to date for anything that I'm doing at drheathereburton.com. That's DRHEATHEREBURTON.com.